The phone rang at 2 a.m. and something in my chest already knew. The number was unfamiliar. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting in my living room with the television running low, the way I do when sleep won't come and silence feels too loud. I picked up on the third ring. The voice on the other end was a man's. Calm. Careful. The kind of careful that means someone is about to deliver news they don't know how to carry. He said he was on Interstate 20. Said he'd found a young woman on the shoulder of the road, barely conscious, her body curled against the guardrail like she'd been trying to make herself small. He said she kept saying one word. Mama. He found the phone in her jacket pocket. Called the first contact listed. My chest went hollow before I could speak. I asked him one question. He described her, and I was already moving before he finished the sentence. Then she came on the line. Her voice was barely air, ragged, broken at the edges in a way I had never heard from my daughter in 30 years of her life. Mom. A pause, breathing that sounded wet and uneven. It's Jeff. And his brothers. Another breath, struggling for it this time. They pranked me. I couldn't. The line lost her. I am Shaniqua Redmond, retired Human Resources Director, 30 years reading people for a living, their language, their silences, the space between what they say and what they mean. I have sat across from men who lied with perfect stillness and women who told the truth while shaking apart. I know what a person sounds like when something has been done to them. My daughter sounded like something had been done to her. I called my son-in-law. If you are watching this and you have a child, it does not matter how old they get. The moment something threatens them, every year of your life collapses into one instinct. I need you to drop a comment and tell me what time you are watching this, because what I am about to tell you kept me awake for weeks. Jeff answered on the second ring. His voice was even, not groggy, not panicked, even, the way a man sounds when he has already decided how a conversation is going to go before it starts. I told him his wife was on the side of Interstate 20 and could barely breathe. The silence that followed was one beat too long. One beat. That is all it takes when you have spent 30 years in HR learning the architecture of human response. A husband who loves his wife does not pause. He does not calculate. He reacts. Jeff calculated. Then he said, "She probably had too much to drink. She does this." I said nothing. "I'm not driving out there at 2 in the morning, Shaniqua. She's a grown woman." That was the sentence, not a confession. Something more useful than a confession. A revelation, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just arrives, quiet and permanent, like a door closing in a house you didn't know you were standing in. I dropped the call without a word. I did not cry. I did not move for a full 30 seconds. I sat in my living room with the television still running low and let what I had just heard settle into the part of me that spent 3 decades learning exactly what a man sounds like when he has already decided the outcome of something. Jeff Drummond had already decided. I picked up my phone. I did not call family. I did not call the hospital. I scrolled to one name, a name I had not used in months, and I pressed call. Donovan picked up before the second ring. Donovan did not ask me why I was calling at 2 a.m. He just said, "Where are you?" I told him I was on my way to him. He said he would put the coffee on. That is the thing about people who spent decades working cases that other people couldn't stomach. They don't rattle. Donovan Reese spent 22 years inside Atlanta PD before he went private. Homicide adjacent. The kind of work that teaches you to listen for what a person leaves out more than what they put in. When I walked into his kitchen at 3 in the morning and sat down across from him, he let me talk without interrupting once. I laid out everything. The stranger's voice, Camila's breathing, the specific words she managed before the line lost her. Then Jeff. The second ring. The evenness in his voice. The one beat of silence before he responded. The phrasing he chose. I told Donovan every word Jeff said, and the exact order he said it in. When I finished, Donovan asked 2 questions. I answered both. He picked up his phone. What he filed that night was a welfare check. Formal, documented, logged with Atlanta PD. A young woman had been found in visible medical distress on Interstate 20 after what responding EMTs documented as a possible impaired abandonment situation. Hospital staff had already flagged preliminary toxicology concerns requiring additional review. Because she arrived disoriented and partially responsive, the hospital had already created mandatory documentation tied to the incident before sunrise. In the only coherent statement she managed before losing consciousness, she named specific individuals. Her spouse had been contacted and declined to respond or come to the hospital. That was enough for Atlanta PD to move carefully and begin documenting everything early while toxicology confirmation was still pending. By morning, we were at Jeff's door. I did not knock loudly. I stood to the side while the uniformed officer knocked 3 times, measured. Donovan was beside me. I had my hands still at my sides and my face arranged the way I learned to arrange it in 30 years of HR work. When you walk into a room already knowing what you are going to find and you cannot afford to show it. The door opened. Jeff's face did the rest. It lasted less than a second. That flicker. The eyes going to the officer first, then to Donovan, then to me. Something moved behind his expression and was gone before most people would have caught it. I caught it. I have been catching that flicker on people's faces since 1994. He was not arrested. He was asked, carefully, legally, to come in for voluntary questioning related to an incident involving his wife. The officer explained that declining voluntary questioning was his right, but that the welfare report, EMT observations, and hospital documentation would reflect his response either way. Jeff understood what that meant. A man like Jeff always understands what that means. He said he needed to get his keys. He came back with his jacket too. I watched the vehicle pull away from the curb and felt nothing except the particular clarity of a woman who has stopped waiting to be proven right. The waiting was over. Whatever came next was already in motion. I drove to the precinct and waited in a corridor outside the room where Donovan was observing the questioning. Through the narrow corridor window, I could see the angle of Donovan's shoulder. That was all. But I have known Donovan long enough to read him from a shoulder. For the first 20 minutes, his posture said nothing. Then Jeff shifted. I could not hear the words, but I watched it happen through that window. The change in Jeff's body. His hands moving differently, his head dropping slightly. Remorseful. Worried. The performance rolling out like something that had been rehearsed so many times it no longer felt like a performance, even to the man delivering it. And then I saw Donovan's posture change. Just slightly. Just enough. A man who had sat across from hundreds of people in that kind of room. Shifting. My stomach went cold. Donovan came out of that room 40 minutes later. He did not have to say anything. I read the answer in the way he closed the door behind him. Carefully. The way you close a door when you are controlling something you do not want to show. He sat down beside me in that corridor and kept his voice low. Jeff had been cooperative, emotional. He called what happened on Interstate 20 a prank that went too far. Boys being boys. He said Camila had been drinking and that his brothers were just trying to have fun with her. He said he was devastated. He said he loved his wife more than anything and had been worried sick since he heard. And then he asked, voice breaking just enough, why nobody had called him sooner. Donovan said the language was clean, no contradictions, No hesitation on the wrong questions. Whoever Jeff Drummond was in private, in that room, he had been a husband in pain. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "What did he do with his hands?" Donovan looked at me. Still. The whole time. I nodded. In 30 years of HR work, I never once met a person in genuine shock who could keep their hands still. Grief moves through the body. It has nowhere else to go. A man who just learned his wife was found barely breathing on a highway at 2 a.m. does not sit with still hands. He grips something. He presses his palms flat. He does something. Jeff had done nothing. But none of that was evidence. And Donovan knew it, and I knew it. Without Camila's cooperation, there was nothing to hold him on. No formal complaint. No statement from the victim. The welfare check had done its job. It had documented his initial response, logged his affect, established a paper trail that now existed regardless of what came next. But it could not keep him in that building. They had to let him go. I stood up when Donovan told me. I smoothed the front of my jacket the way I have smoothed the front of every jacket before every difficult meeting I have ever walked into. It is not vanity. It is the physical act of composing yourself when composing yourself is the only option available. I watched Jeff come out of that room. He looked different from the man who had performed in there, not dramatically, just slightly. The way a person looks when they have been holding a specific expression for a long time, and finally release it when they think no one is watching. A small settling. A quiet return to something more natural. That natural expression was not grief. He walked down the corridor ahead of us. At the main door, he stopped and spoke to the officer who had ridden with him. Something brief, something that made the officer nod. Then he pushed through the door. Outside on the steps, he paused, reached into his jacket, adjusted something at his collar. Then he went down those steps without looking back once. Not at the building, not at the door, not in the direction of his wife's hospital, not once. I have spent 30 years learning the difference between a person who has just been through something and a person who has just finished something. The way a man moves when something is behind him rather than in front of him is not the same. The body tells the truth even when the mouth has been trained not to. Jeff Drummond moved like a man who had just finished something, and he had not looked back once. Camila was awake when I walked in. That was the first thing. The second thing was her eyes. The way they shifted the moment she saw me. Not relief. Not the softening a child gives a mother after something terrible. Something harder than that. Already set. Already decided before I crossed the threshold. I pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down without speaking. I have learned over many years that the person who speaks first in a tense room hands over something they cannot get back. I was not handing over anything. She spoke first. "You had no right to call the police, Mama." Her voice was steadier than I expected for a woman who had been on the side of Interstate 20 less than 12 hours ago. That steadiness told me everything about how long she had been rehearsing that sentence before I arrived. Jeff would never do something like this on purpose. It was a prank. People do stupid things sometimes and it goes wrong. That does not make it criminal. I said nothing. He has been texting me all morning. He is devastated. He wanted to come straight to the hospital, but you showed up at his door with police officers, and now he does not know what to do. I watched her hands while she talked. Every time she said his name, Jeff, her fingers found the edge of the bedsheet and twisted. Not dramatically, just slightly. The way the body does things the mind has not authorized. I have sat across from enough people in enough difficult rooms To know that the hands speak a language the mouth spends enormous energy trying to contradict. Camila's hands were speaking. She kept talking. The prank was harmless. Jeff's brothers had always been that way. Rowdy, immature, but not dangerous. She should have said something sooner about how they behaved. This was partly her fault for not setting boundaries earlier. She was not trying to excuse it. She was just trying to give it context. I watched her reframe the night she almost died on a highway into a story about her own failure to manage her in-laws. I did not argue. I have known since Camila was 16 years old that she is a woman who tightens around a position the moment she feels it being challenged. Arguing with her was never how you reached her. You reached Camila by letting her talk until she heard herself, or by giving her something she could not argue with. I did not have that something yet. So I sat with her a little longer. I asked about her pain levels. I asked what the doctors had said about her recovery. I kept my voice the same. Temperature it had been when I walked in. Not warm, not cold, just steady. When she started to wind back to Jeff, I redirected gently to something practical. She let me. Before I left, I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. That squeeze was the most honest thing that passed between us in that room. In the elevator going down, I stood very still. The grief that moves through you when you watch your child defend someone who has harmed her is not loud. It does not announce itself. It settles. Heavy and silent, the way water settles at the bottom of something deep. I walked out of that hospital into the Atlanta morning and stood beside my car for a moment. Then I opened my phone and called Prudence. She answered on the second ring. I said 4 words. I need your help. He arrived at 2:30 carrying a small bunch of flowers. Not an arrangement. Not something ordered and delivered. A hand-carried bunch. The kind you stop for on the way. The kind that says, I was thinking of you the whole drive here. I was standing at the far end of the ward near the family waiting area when he came through the door, and I watched him the way I have watched people walk into difficult rooms for 30 years. You learn things from an entrance. The pace, the eyes, where a person looks first. Jeff looked at the nurse's station first, then at the room numbers. Then he adjusted the flowers in his hand and walked toward Camila's room with his shoulders carrying just the right amount of weight for a concerned husband. Not too much, not too little, just right. I stayed where I was. Through the window in Camila's door, I could see the shape of the visit without hearing it. He sat close. He leaned in. At one point, he put his forehead briefly against her hand. The kind of gesture that reads across a room even when you cannot hear the words attached to it. One of the nurses passing through the corridor glanced in and her expression softened visibly. I watched that happen. Donovan came by briefly. He had stopped in to check something with the floor. And we stood together for a moment near the waiting area. He watched Jeff through that same window. After a moment, he said quietly, "Nothing I can take back to anyone." I said, "I know." He left. I stayed. What I was watching was not what Jeff did. I learned a long time ago that what a person does in a performance is often less revealing than what they avoid entirely. Jeff never approached the nursing station. The toxicology panel had been preliminarily flagged. I knew this because the attending physician had mentioned earlier that morning that there were abnormal findings requiring further confirmation. It was enough to make the nurses on that floor more alert than usual. Information like that travels quietly through a hospital even when it is not formally discussed in front of family. And maybe another husband would have reacted differently. Stress changes people unevenly. Some become frantic, some shut down. Some ask too many questions, and some ask none at all. But in my experience, uncertainty eventually pulls at people who are genuinely afraid for someone they love. Maybe not immediately, maybe not dramatically, but eventually they circle back toward the thing frightening them. They ask a nurse something. They stop a doctor in the corridor. They look for reassurance, some form of clarity. Jeff never moved toward the nursing station, not once. He kept his chair angled away from the door. He kept his back to the corridor the entire visit. He focused almost exclusively on what was directly in front of him and seemed to pay very little attention to what was happening outside the room. Not because that proved guilt. I knew better than to mistake instinct for evidence. But sometimes people avoid questions they are already afraid of hearing answered. Jeff sat very still. He left 40 minutes after he arrived. Another gesture at the door. A look back at Camila. Something soft said from the threshold. Then he was gone. I moved to the window at the end of the corridor. His car was in the lot below. I watched him walk to it, get in, pull out of the space. At the exit, he did not check his mirrors. He turned onto the street and was gone. And maybe another person might have moved exactly the same way under stress. I knew that too. Still, something about the ease of it stayed with me. A man leaving his critically ill wife does not usually move like someone mentally finished with the situation. Jeff moved that way. 3 days passed and Jeff did not come back to the hospital. Camila had an explanation ready each time I visited. The first day, it was a meeting he could not move. The second day, it was a client situation that needed handling in person. By the third day, she had stopped offering specifics and simply said he was busy, but they spoke every night and he was sending things, a food delivery, a card, something small that arrived with a note in his handwriting. I listened to all of it and said nothing. I was not going to reach Camila through argument. I had established that in my own mind on the day I left this hospital and called prudence. What I needed was not a debate. What I needed was something solid enough that even love could not talk around it. I did not have that yet. So I visited. I sat. I listened. I watched my daughter's face when she talked about a man who had not walked through her hospital room door in 3 days, and I kept everything I was thinking exactly where it was, behind my eyes, out of my mouth. On the 4th morning, Camila asked me to handle her calls. She was fatigued. The doctors had adjusted something in her medication, and she needed to rest without interruption. She told the floor nurse that I was her designated contact for the day, and signed the temporary authorization forms the nurse brought in. She handed me her phone and was asleep within the hour. The call came from the bank at 11:43. I stepped into the hallway to take it. The compliance officer was professional and measured. He explained that a large cash withdrawal from a joint account had triggered an automatic reporting review tied to federal banking regulations. Because Camila was listed as co-owner, the bank was contacting her to document awareness and confirm whether the transaction appeared authorized. He did not initially give the amount. I told him Camila was temporarily unavailable but aware the bank might call. He asked whether she could confirm the transaction later that day. I said yes. Then he gave the amount. $47,000. Cash. Not a transfer. Not a payment to a contractor or vendor. Cash. The kind of withdrawal that becomes difficult to trace once it leaves a counter. I stood in that hallway for a moment after the call ended. Then I walked back into the room and waited for Camila to surface from sleep. When she did, I told her calmly what the bank had called about. I watched her face move through 3 expressions in the space of 4 seconds. Confusion. Then something that wanted to become alarm. Then the thing that had been protecting Jeff Drummond since the night she woke up in this hospital bed. She said there must be a reason. She said he had mentioned a business investment weeks ago, and this was probably connected to that. Then she asked for her phone. She called him from the hospital bed. He answered immediately. His voice came through the speaker calm and unhurried. I could not hear every word clearly, but I watched Camila's shoulders slowly drop while he spoke. 3 sentences, maybe 4. She thanked him and ended the call. Then she looked at me with an expression I recognized from when she was 17 years old and had made a decision she knew I disagreed with but was not going to change. He explained it, Mama. I picked up my bag. I kissed her forehead. I walked out of that room and down the corridor and through the hospital doors into the Atlanta afternoon. I sat in my car and called Donovan. He heard something in my voice before I said a word. He did not ask what happened. He just said, "What do you need?" Camila gave written consent from her hospital bed. She did not ask many questions when Donovan explained what he needed and why. The $47,000 had done something to her that 3 days of my visits had not. It had introduced a question she could not immediately hand back to Jeff. She signed the consent forms as co-owner and legal resident of the property and looked out the window while I folded them and put them in my bag. She did not say anything when we left. Donovan coordinated the request that afternoon, a welfare-related follow-up on the marital residence tied to the existing Interstate 20 documentation, the flagged financial activity, and concern that Jeff had abruptly disappeared while his wife remained hospitalized. The entry was not a full search warrant. Camila's signed consent allowed officers to lawfully enter the shared residence, check whether anything required immediate attention, and document only what was visible in plain view connected to the active case. Nobody was opening drawers. Nobody was digging through closed boxes. That mattered. By the following morning, we had clearance. The front door opened to silence, not the silence of a house where someone has stepped out. The other kind. The kind a space holds when the person who animated it has removed themselves deliberately and completely. I have walked into enough vacated offices and cleared out desks in 30 years to know the difference between a room someone left and a room someone evacuated. This was an evacuation. I followed Donovan and the officer through each room. Jeff's side of the closet, bare. Not a shirt, not a belt. The kind of clearing that takes time and intention. Not the grab of a man leaving in anger. His drawers in the bathroom were closed and nobody touched them, but his counter was stripped clean. His shelf in the home office, cleared. Wherever Jeff Drummond had existed physically in this house, he had removed himself from with care. But the furniture was still there. The artwork was still there. And the photographs were still on the wall. I stopped in the living room in front of the one above the mantel. Jeff and Camila on their wedding day. Him in a dark suit. Her in something ivory and fitted. Both of them caught mid-laugh at something happening just outside the frame. It was still hanging perfectly level. The kind of thing a man packing to disappear leaves behind not from sentiment, but from calculation. It does not fit in a bag, and leaving it causes no immediate damage. I looked at it for a long moment. Then Donovan's voice came from the back bedroom. Shaniqua. One word. The specific tone of a man who has found something. The folder was on the upper shelf of the bedroom closet, pushed toward the back but still visible without opening or moving anything. It was thick. The kind of thickness that makes something awkward to carry quickly when your hands are already full of everything else you decided mattered more. Inside were property records. Camila's name appeared on every page. Her 3 rental properties, the commercial space, documents that should have been in a safe or an attorney's office, not in a folder in a man's closet with handwritten notations in the margins that I did not yet fully understand. I photographed every page, both sides, every margin note. I did not try to interpret it standing there. I just documented it the way I have documented things my entire professional life, completely, carefully, and without pausing to react. We drove back in near silence. I called Camila from the car. I told her what we had found. I kept my voice even. I told her about the folder, the property records, the notations. I gave her the facts the way facts deserve to be given, plainly, without cushioning that distorts them. The silence that followed was the longest I have ever heard from my daughter. When she finally spoke, she did not ask if I was sure. She did not offer an explanation. She said his name once, just once. Then she said, "How long has he been planning this?" The margin notations in that folder were not random. Donovan spent 2 days pulling the financial trail attached to the property records I had photographed. What he found underneath them was a layer Jeff had not expected anyone to reach. Shell company registrations, thin paperwork, and a name that appeared twice across 2 separate documents. Not a Drummond name. Not anyone connected to Jeff's immediate family on record. Donovan ran it. The name connected to Wardell. Wardell Drummond had been on Donovan's radar since Interstate 20. With Jeff gone, the bank records already pulling, and now his name surfacing inside financial documents tied directly to Camila's properties. Investigators brought him in for questioning alongside the records they had already started assembling. Donovan told me Wardell came in defensive, angry, certain Jeff would protect him the way family always promises family will. That changed inside the interview room. Jeff had emptied one of the Shell accounts 2 days earlier without warning anybody connected to it. The transfer trail showed it clearly. Wardell learned about it sitting across from Donovan while staring at paperwork with his own signature attached to companies Jeff had positioned around Camila's assets. Then came the second thing. Phone records placing Jeff making travel arrangements while everyone else connected to Interstate 20 was still exposed and stationary in Atlanta. Donovan said that was the moment Wardell understood something important. Jeff was leaving alone. Donovan did not offer deals himself. That was for prosecutors. But he laid out the evidence already moving into place. Financial conspiracy exposure, the Interstate 20 timeline, preliminary toxicology concerns, and the possibility that everyone involved would be left carrying different pieces of the same collapse, while Jeff disappeared into another state with cash. Wardell asked for an attorney 37 minutes into questioning. After that attorney arrived, discussions with the prosecutor's office began. By the time Wardell gave his formal statement, he was no longer protecting Jeff. He was protecting himself. Donovan called me when it was over. He read from his notes the way he used to brief cases, methodically, without editorializing, giving me the information in the order it happened rather than the order that would have the most impact. I did not interrupt once. 3 days before the highway incident, Jeff had driven that specific stretch of Interstate 20 with Wardell. Not as a test run, as a selection. He had chosen that stretch deliberately. Limited lighting, high speed, the nearest exit far enough that a person on foot, disoriented, could not reach it quickly. Wardell confirmed the route was chosen 3 days in advance. The drink had been prepared deliberately, not some party mix, not a mistake. Wardell described a sedating combination meant to leave Camila confused, physically weak, and struggling to stay alert. The kind of thing that could first be mistaken for intoxication or a severe reaction if no one looked deeper. They had discussed timing. They had discussed how long it might remain visible in her system. They had discussed what story to tell if anyone asked questions too soon. Jeff had spoken to his brothers before they drove away from that guardrail. Wardell repeated the words, "I will not put them here." Some things you hear and carry and do not repeat because repeating them gives them a life they do not deserve outside of a courtroom. The asset timeline Jeff had laid out to Wardell weeks before the incident. Which account first? Which property transfer after? Which state he intended to be in before anyone understood what had happened? Wardell gave all of it. every sequence, every step. When Donovan finished, I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked him one question. Did he know she might not survive the night? Donovan paused. That pause was the answer. I thanked Donovan. I ended the call. I called Camila not to tell her everything, not yet. I asked one small question, something that sounded like conversation but was really a temperature check on where her mind had traveled since the empty house. She answered. And in the way she answered, I heard it. The sound of a woman beginning to understand that something she built her life around had never been real. Then she said, almost to herself, Mama, he was looking at this house the week before we got married. I kept thinking he just loved it. She paused. I thought he loved it. My phone rang at 5:43 in the morning. I was already awake. I had not slept past 4 in days. My body had developed its own alert system somewhere around the third night after that 2 a.m. call and had not stood down since. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had stopped tasting an hour ago when Donovan's name came across the screen. I picked up before the second ring. He said, He's at Hartsfield. I set my cup down. Jeff had made it through check-in. He had a bag. One carry-size bag. The kind that does not require checking, the kind that moves fastest. He had cash. He had a ticket on a 6:10 departure. Donovan did not tell me the destination, and I did not ask because it did not matter. What mattered was the gate. C-17. What Jeff Drummond did not know, could not have known, was that Wardle had spent most of the previous afternoon inside a room with prosecutors and investigators, giving a sworn statement covering every element of what happened on Interstate 20 and every financial step Jeff had laid out in the weeks before it. Overnight, investigators finalized arrest warrants tied to the Interstate 20 case, entered them into the system before dawn, and coordinated directly with airport law enforcement already stationed at Hartsfield-Jackson. By the time Jeff reached security, his identification was already attached to an active warrant notification. Hartsfield is the busiest airport in the world. It has people whose entire function is to already be in place before the person they are waiting for arrives. 2 agents and an airport officer were already near C-17 when Jeff got there. Donovan stayed on the line with me as it unfolded. His voice was low and even. The voice of a man relaying information he has been waiting to relay for days. Jeff reached the gate, joined the boarding line, standard, unhurried, the walk of a man who believes he has already won. He handed over his boarding pass. The scanner paused. Donovan said, He's looking up now. I sat very still at my kitchen table. Airport officers had already been alerted through the warrant entry attached to his identification during check-in. The gate agent stalled the scan exactly long enough for the officers positioned near the terminal seating area to move closer without drawing attention from the rest of the boarding line. Then Donovan said quietly, They're moving. I did not speak. I held the phone and I listened and I looked at the surface of my kitchen table. The grain of the wood, a small ring left by a glass years ago that I never fully treated. Ordinary details inside an ordinary room where I had just heard the most important sentence of the last 2 weeks. They're moving. When Donovan told me it was done, I set the phone on the table. I did not stand up. I did not move to another room. I sat exactly where I was and folded my hands in front of me the way my mother taught me to sit when something required more than words. For the first time since a stranger called me from the side of Interstate 20, I closed my eyes. I breathed. Not relief exactly, not satisfaction. Something older and quieter than either of those things. The specific release of a woman who has been holding the weight of something enormous almost entirely alone and has finally felt the first hands beside hers on it. I sat like that for a long time. Then my phone rang again. Donovan. I answered. He said he had just finished with the agents on site. I asked him one thing, how Jeff had been when they took him, whether he had said anything, whether there had been any reaction. Donovan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, nothing, not one word. Not about Camila, not about Wardle. He just looked at them and went. I sat with that. A man with nothing left to perform for performs nothing. I arrived at the hospital at 8 in the morning. Camila was sitting up when I walked in. She had done her hair. Not fully, just enough. The kind of effort a woman makes when she is trying to hold on to something normal while everything around her stops being normal. She looked at me when I came through the door, and I saw it in her face immediately. She already knew something had happened. She just did not know the shape of it yet. I sat down beside her bed. I did not take her hand first. I did not soften my posture or arrange my expression into something gentler than what I was carrying. I have spent 30 years delivering difficult information to people who needed it. And the kindest thing you can do in that moment is not make them wait for it. I told her everything. The route Jeff and Wardell had chosen 3 days before the highway. The drink, what it was designed to do, what it was designed to look like if she had not been found when she was. The specific stretch of Interstate 20 selected for its darkness and speed. The folder I had photographed in the back bedroom of her own house, her property records, her father's legacy, with her husband's handwriting in the margins. The $47,000 pulled in cash. The asset sequence Wardle had described. Which account, which property, in what order. The 6:10 flight Jeff was boarded for when the agents took him at gate C-17. I gave it to her in order. No gaps, no softening. Camila did not speak while I talked. She sat with her hands flat on the blanket in front of her, and she listened. Her face moved through things I could not name and did not try to. There are expressions that belong entirely to the person wearing them. When I finished, the room was quiet. She stayed quiet for a long time. Then she asked me one question. Not whether he had ever loved her. Not how long it had been going on. Not why. She asked, was he ever going to come back to the hospital? I looked at my daughter. I did not answer. The answer was already in the room with us, and we both knew it had been there for days. Some questions are not asked because the person asking them does not know. They are asked because the person asking them needs to hear the silence confirm what they have already understood. The silence confirmed it. Camila turned to face the window. Atlanta was outside. Ordinary Atlanta morning, traffic and light, and the city moving the way cities move regardless of what is happening in any particular room. She looked at it for a long time. I did not speak. I did not shift in my chair. I did not reach for her hand. I have learned that some silences are doing necessary work, and the worst thing you can do is interrupt them. She stayed at that window for a long time. When she turned back, her eyes were dry. Not because she had not felt it. I could see that she had felt all of it. But she had felt it at the window, privately, in the way she needed to. And what she brought back to the room with her was something steadier than what she had turned away with. She said, "Call Prudence." I nodded. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then she looked back up. "And I need you to call whoever I need to call about those property papers." Prudence arrived at the hospital at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a leather folder and nothing unnecessary. That was the thing about Prudence. She did not bring anything into a room that she did not intend to use. No small talk. No performative sympathy. She pulled a chair to Camila's bedside, sat down, opened the folder, and began. She said the marriage being under 2 years was relevant, but not the primary protection. What mattered more was the nature of Camila's assets. The 3 rental properties and the commercial space had been inherited from her father, acquired before the marriage, titled solely in Camila's name throughout, never restructured to include Jeff in any ownership capacity. Under Georgia law, inherited property and assets kept separate before marriage are generally excluded from equitable distribution in divorce proceedings. Jeff had no established claim to any of those titles. He never had. What he had been doing with that folder and those margin notations was studying a door he was never legally going to be able to open through divorce. His only path had always been the other one. Prudence said it plainly and moved on. The $47,000 cash withdrawal from the joint account was different. That was marital money. And withdrawing it as cash during active legal trouble could be presented as fraudulent dissipation of marital assets. A portion of those funds might be recoverable through the divorce proceedings. Not guaranteed, but worth pursuing. The divorce could be filed immediately. Given Jeff's custody status and the amount of documented evidence already in the system, Prudence expected parts of the divorce to move faster than usual, though she made clear nothing in court was automatic. Jeff could still answer through counsel. He could still delay certain things, but his practical ability to control the process had changed. That mattered. Camila listened to all of it with her hands in her lap. She asked 2 questions, both practical, both precise, not the questions of a woman in shock. The questions of a woman who had decided something at a window the morning before and had not changed her mind since. When Prudence slid the first document across, she signed it without hesitation. When the second followed, she read it once and signed that too. I sat beside my daughter the entire time and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Prudence was doing what she was built to do, and Camila was doing what she had finally given herself permission to do. My job in that room was simply to be the reason both of those things were happening. Presence can be its own complete sentence. I have known that for a long time. Prudence left at 3:15. My phone rang 4 minutes later. Prudence, calling from the parking lot, her voice dropping the professional register slightly, the way it does when she is moving from formal into something more direct. She said there was something in Jeff's financial history that needed pulling. She had seen a name inside the property documentation, one of the names from the shell company registrations, that appeared in a civil complaint filed in another state approximately 3 years ago. The complaint had been withdrawn before prosecution. The record was thin, but it existed. She said she thought I should know before it surfaced somewhere less useful. I told her I appreciated the call. When she hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand for a moment. The name she had described, I already knew which one it was. Donovan had flagged it 2 days ago when he was pulling the shell company trail. I had been waiting to see whether it would surface through another channel before I moved on it. It just had. I pulled up Donovan's number. "Pull everything on a civil complaint," I said. "I'll send you the name." What Donovan found was not dramatic. He called me the following morning and read it the same way he reads everything, methodically, without inflection, giving me the facts in the order they occurred, rather than the order that would land hardest. I have always appreciated that about him. The truth does not need staging. It only needs space. 3 years before Jeff Drummond came into my daughter's life, he was in a relationship with a woman in Tennessee. She had property, a duplex, and a parcel of land left to her by her grandmother. She had inherited savings sitting in accounts that were in her name alone. The relationship lasted 14 months. It followed a pattern that Donovan described without editorializing: fast attachment, early talk of the future, gradual positioning for financial access. It ended when her attorney flagged irregular account activity. She did not panic. She did not confront Jeff directly. She quietly transferred her assets into a protected structure, closed the accounts he had visibility into, and removed herself from the relationship before he could complete whatever he had started. She filed a civil complaint and then withdrew it before any formal litigation moved forward. She never gave a statement to law enforcement. She simply got out and sealed every door behind her. Jeff was never charged. His record stayed clean. Donovan finished reading and waited. I sat with it for a long moment. Not because it surprised me. It did not surprise me at all. What it did was confirm something I had carried as instinct for a long time and had never been able to hand to anyone as fact. The first night Jeff came to my house, before the engagement, before the marriage, before any of what came after, he sat in my living room and his eyes moved across that space in a way that had nothing to do with being a guest. He looked at the house. Then he looked at my daughter. And the order of those two things was wrong in a way I felt before I could name. He had done this before. The woman in Tennessee had escaped because she had an attorney paying attention and the instinct to move quietly. Camila had neither when Jeff found her. What he had done was refine. He had taken what almost worked and made it more careful, more patient, more complete. He had chosen someone whose attorney was not yet watching and whose love for him was deep enough to buy him the time he needed. Or so he thought. The pattern of behavior was legally significant in a way that Donovan explained carefully. The Tennessee incident itself was not an open and shut admission of criminal conduct. The civil complaint had been withdrawn, and there had never been charges. That meant prosecutors would have to fight to use any of it. But the similarities mattered. A prior relationship involving inherited assets, irregular financial positioning, and quiet attempts at access could help establish pattern and intent if the judge allowed portions of it into evidence. There would be hearings, objections, arguments over admissibility, nothing automatic about it. Still, if the court permitted even part of it in, the prosecution's theory changed completely. Jeff had not snapped. He had not made one desperate decision under pressure. He had executed a plan with elements investigators now believed had existed before Camila ever entered his life. I took everything Donovan had compiled, his notes, the civil complaint record, the account activity documentation from Tennessee, the timeline mapped against Jeff's relationship with Camila, and I drove to the prosecutor's office that afternoon. She read through all of it at her desk while I sat across from her. When she reached the last page, she looked up. "How did you get all of this?" I looked at her steadily. "I've been watching him," I said, "since the first night he came to my house." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the folder. She did not hand it back. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Nearly 11 months had passed since the night Interstate 20 entered our lives, but sitting inside that room made time feel strangely compressed. I do not know what I had imagined. Something weightier, perhaps. Something whose architecture matched what had brought us all here. What I found instead was fluorescent lighting and wooden benches worn smooth by years of people, sitting in exactly the kind of pain I was sitting in now. It felt administrative, procedural, more like the misconduct hearings I had managed for 30 years than the moral reckoning I had carried in my chest since 2 a.m. on a Tuesday morning on Interstate 20. But the evidence did not feel small. Wardell took the stand on the second day. He did not look at Jeff when he sat down. Not once. Not when he was sworn in. Not when the prosecutor began. Not when the defense cross-examined him. He kept his eyes on the prosecutor, on the jury, on the middle distance above the gallery. Everywhere except the table where his brother was sitting. He spoke without drama. That was what held the room. He gave the route, the selection process, how they had driven that stretch of interstate 23 days before, how Jeff had chosen it specifically for its darkness and distance between exits. He gave the drink. What was in it? What it was intended to do? What they believed it would resemble if Camila had not been found when she was. He gave the timeline of the asset plan Jeff had laid out weeks before the highway. The accounts, the sequence, the state Jeff intended to reach before anyone understood what had happened. He gave Jeff's words before they drove away from that guardrail. The jury watched him the entire time, not because his delivery was dramatic, because it was not. A man performing remorse performs with his whole body. His voice climbs and drops. His hands move. His eyes fill at the right moments. Wardell did none of that. He sat straight and spoke evenly and gave the jury every fact in the order it occurred. The defense tried to break him anyway. They attacked the cooperation agreement, suggested he was shaping testimony to reduce his own exposure, suggested resentment toward Jeff after discovering the emptied shell account, suggested he was giving prosecutors the version they wanted in exchange for survival. Wardell absorbed all of it without changing tone once. The rest of the evidence came in harder fought than people outside courtrooms imagine things come in. The toxicology report, the phone records placing Jeff's search of that specific highway, stretched 72 hours before the incident. The $47,000 withdrawal, the recorded call to me the night of. A husband who was told his wife was on the side of a highway, barely breathing, and never once asked whether she was going to survive. The property folder. Donovan's documentation. The Tennessee civil complaint took nearly an entire afternoon of argument before the judge allowed limited portions into evidence as pattern material connected to financial intent. The defense objected repeatedly. The judge overruled them carefully, point by point. Jeff sat at the defense table and performed nothing. There was no audience left worth performing for. The jury was not Camila. The jury was not a hospital corridor full of people who warmed to soft voices and carefully chosen gifts. He looked straight ahead with the same flatness Donovan had described at Gate C-17, and the same flatness I had seen the morning we stood at his door. It did not help him. In a room where the evidence was speaking this clearly, a man who shows nothing reads less like controlled innocence and more like absence. I watched him from the gallery and thought about that morning. How frozen he had looked when the door opened. How quickly the mask had come back up. It never came back up once in this courtroom. Closing arguments finished late on the fourth day. The jury was sent to deliberate. I drove home. I made dinner. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had folded my hands and closed my eyes the morning they took him at Gate C-17. And I waited. The call came before I finished eating. The jury had returned. The four-person stood and the courtroom went the particular kind of quiet that has weight to it. Not silence exactly. The absence of everything unnecessary. Breathing adjusted. Bodies stilled. The kind of collective suspension that happens when a room full of people understands that the next few seconds will divide everything into before and after. The judge asked the question. The four-person answered. Guilty. Premeditated attempted murder. Administering a hazardous substance with intent to cause serious harm. The judge's voice did not waver, reading the verdict into the record. It was even and final, the way only institutional language can be, stripped of everything personal, carrying everything that matters. I sat in the gallery and let the words land without trying to manage how they felt. Jeff did not react. He looked straight ahead at a point somewhere beyond the bench. The same absence I had first catalogued in a hospital room when he stood with his back to the door and never once moved toward the nursing station. The same flatness Donovan had described at Gate C-17. He was consistent. I will give him that. Whatever Jeff Drummond was underneath everything he performed for everyone else, he was at least consistent in what he showed when there was nothing left to perform. He gave them nothing. It no longer mattered what he gave. I was watching Camila more than I was watching Jeff. She was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, straight-backed, hands folded in her lap, the posture of a woman who had decided before she walked into this building how she was going to carry herself when this moment arrived. When the foreperson said the word, she did not flinch. She did not drop her head. She exhaled. Just that. One breath released. I recognized it. It was the same exhale I had let out alone in my kitchen the morning Donovan called from the airport. The sound of something that has been held far past the point where holding it was sustainable finally being set down. Not relief. Not triumph. Just the body remembering how to breathe normally after weeks of doing it carefully. Jeff was taken from the courtroom. I watched him go. Not from satisfaction. Satisfaction would have required me to feel that this outcome was a gift, rather than a correction. What I felt was completion. The particular stillness of a thing that has been in motion for a long time coming to its necessary stop. When he was gone, I looked at Camila, then at Prudence, who was seated beside her with her leather folder closed in her lap, her work done, her expression composed, her eyes carrying the quiet acknowledgement of a woman who understands that what just happened in this room is as good as the machinery gets. Then, across the room at Donovan, he was standing near the back wall with his hands in his pockets. He had not sat down once during the verdict. When my eyes found his, he gave me one small nod, nothing more. A man who spent 22 years inside this system and understood that what it had just done was not remarkable. It was simply correct. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Outside on the courthouse steps, the Atlanta afternoon was ordinary in the way that always surprises you after something extraordinary. The city indifferent, the traffic moving, the light falling the same way it falls on every other day. Camila came to stand beside me. She took my hand. We stood like that for a moment. Then she said, quietly, not looking at me, looking out at the street, "I need to tell you something about the day he proposed." We sat on my porch as the Atlanta evening came in. Camila had been quiet the whole drive from the courthouse. Not the defensive quiet of the woman who had lain in a hospital bed telling me I had no right. Something different. The quiet of a person carrying something they have decided to finally put down in the right place. She spoke first. She said that the day Jeff proposed, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. The location, the ring, the words he chose. She had told him once, early in the relationship, what she had always imagined that moment feeling like, and he had listened and built it precisely from what she described. She said yes before he finished the sentence. But underneath all of it, something felt slightly wrong and she could not name it. Not a feeling she could point to directly. More like a sound that stops just before you identify it. She told herself it was nerves. She told herself that love sometimes arrives carrying its own fear, and that what she was feeling was the weight of something real, rather than the warning of something false. She said yes. She looked at her hands when she finished. "I knew something," she said quietly. "I just didn't know what to do with it." I sat with that for a moment. Then I told her what I had never said. The first night Jeff came to my house, I watched him move through my living room, and something in me paid attention in a way I had learned over 30 years not to ignore completely. He looked at the house before he looked at my daughter. Not quickly, with the kind of attention people give things they are mentally measuring. He asked about the property that same evening, whose name it was in, whether it had been in the family long, whether Camila had siblings who shared in it. Questions dressed as interest that landed in me differently. At the time, I did not have proof of anything, just discomfort, instinct, a feeling I could not responsibly hand to my daughter as fact. But I trusted that feeling enough to move carefully around it. I did not tell Camila because I had understood since she was a young woman that she tightens around what she loves when she feels it being threatened. Telling her too early would not have protected her. It would only have pushed her further toward him and further away from me. So I moved differently. The week after that first evening, I called Donovan. Not to open an investigation. There was nothing to investigate yet. To establish the relationship. To make sure that if I ever needed to move quickly, I already had the right person on the line. A few months later, I told Camila that every woman who holds property should have an estate plan. Framed as general wisdom, nothing more. She made an appointment with Prudence. Prudence documented the full asset structure independently before the marriage was 6 months old. That documentation became part of what protected those titles when Jeff's plans finally surfaced. Her father's properties, still generating income, still in her name, exactly where he left them for her. Camila was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "You never told me any of that." "No. You just moved." "Yes." She looked out at the street, the neighborhood settling into evening the way Atlanta does. Slowly, warmly, the light going amber before it goes dark. After a while, she leaned back in her chair and we sat together without filling the space between us. We did not talk about Jeff again that night. We talked about her father, what he had built and why he had built it, and what it meant, what it really meant, that everything he left her had survived a man who spent more than a year trying to take it and walked away with nothing. Nothing except time. He came for what her father left her. He left with nothing but time.